care once she no longer could look after him. And this is what she said. I'm not saying it's highly evolved or to do it, but she said, if he goes into long-term care, I'm going into long-term care and I'm going to lay by his bed. Well, the nurses that were, mentoring her, their heart was touched. I mean, all of our hearts were touched because she was absolutely adamant that he was not going to long-term care. And so when you're absolutely seeing your future and you're walking towards it and you're writing it, miracles happen. I mean, miracles happened because she just was relentless. And so we were all too busy, but we showed up. We looked at the funding model. We looked at what the rules in health say to get this woman some help. We went to our MLA. My sister used to babysit for that MLA when he was a high school principal, so we knew him. And we told him our story, and he said, well, his mom was 60 kilometers away in a different town, away from all of her family. So this was just the way things were. It was not right, not good, but this is how things were. So my mom thanked him and said, what's the appeal process? So then we went to the appeal process with our local health department, and we laid out our, it costs this much money to be in long-term care. This is how much it would take to hire some people to give my mom a break. And my mom's not going to go lay in long-term care at his bed. It's very Hindu, isn't it? Where you just lay on the man's bed at the end? Yes. Anyway, it wasn't funny. I mean, it was really stressful for all of us. We did not get that appeal, and then they told us we could go to the great big region health authority and speak to the board chair and the board. And so we prepared our case and went and talked to this board, and I think they loved us. They loved our being. They loved our love of our dad. They recognized that all they did was look at his doing. They did an assessment that showed he was doing nothing of great competence. But what they didn't look at was his being. There was no way to judge his being. And it was his being that we were in love with and wanted to support. So we got some funding, we got some workers, and my dad was able to live out his life at home. It was hard work, employing people when you're an older woman who's been a farm wife. Not that easy, but luckily her kids are well educated and had lots of experience, and so we were able to, one kid, my sister, looked after the finance, paying the staff. I looked after being a relief to my mom and some of them and some of the medical stuff. My brother has a great experience. He looked after all the pharmaceutical stuff and many other things. So as a whole team, it brought us together so that in the end, we felt closer to each other. We felt closer to our dad. We felt proud of our mom. The future, I can see now, was in the room with us. It was completely open. It looked completely closed. But we were writing it moment by moment. When it was my mom's turn to make her transition, she was still in that same community, and for the last 3 years, she too wanted to be in her own home and have staff. The people in that hospital, in that health unit, still remembered us. So the first thing they offered her was support, to have people come into the house and give her that individualized funding, which takes a lot of energy to manage. But we by then were retired, or at least mostly retired, and so some of us could actually pick up that. So many times we think the future is something solid, or the rules that life gives us are something solid. But in fact, there's something within us that knows the truth. That the future is always in the room with us. What is that call to serve something beyond ourselves? Where comes that feeling of, I just know this is mine to do? What is it that when life is overwhelming and we have been debilitated by something physically, a relationship, financially, that there's still something within our being that holds us? That when we sit in the silence, when we're in emotional pain and are simply there for ourselves, not running away, not abandoning ourselves, sitting with ourselves until the pain subsides, or perhaps until we get an insight about what could this be here to teach me? What is there for me to be learned through this experience? It's my choice. I'm writing my future. How can I realize something through this that I could have realized no other way? When I was 34 or 35, we lived in southern Alberta, and I was at home. I read a Buddhist text that said, I was a householder. I thought that was sort of cute. I was holding the house. I was holding space for the children, for all the meals and all the things that a householder has to do. But I was also being a community volunteer, and I was very involved in my church, the United Church in this city. And I made friends with the young minister, who was quite new there, and another minister from another United Church, two young men in also their 30s, and with young children like me. I think my youngest one was 2 years old. And they were involved in something called 10 Days for World Development. It doesn't exist anymore, but it's a national program that looked at what was happening internationally from the lens of social justice, from the lens of liberation theology. Have you ever heard of that? Liberation theology? It came actually from the Catholics in Central America, and at that point, Central America was, I'm going to say this, the United States had sort of invaded Central America. It was very involved in that war anyway. And this group talked about the fact that the root cause of all that was actually economic, that there was corporations and companies that wanted the land and wanted to, we were still kind of in the time, I think we still were on the time of kind of colonialization, where we say Indigenous people who've lived in a country for tens of thousands of years don't own the land. Why? Because the law, we've written our law to say that they don't. And so that land often was called virgin land. Well, it wasn't virgin land. They'd lived there for centuries. So, of course, there was violence and unrest. It was the same time when apartheid was happening in South Africa. And the press was really kind of here, was kind of on the side of the white majority, the people in power. And the other thing that was happening is they were wanting to test the cruise missile across northern Alberta. Remember that? You probably don't, you're too young. But they were wanting to do that as well. And so we were actually talking about being nuclear free. We were talking about liberation theology, which lifts up the oppressed and says that if that was us, this is how we'd want to be treated, and this is how we wouldn't want to be treated. So we had this young man from South Africa, a priest, who the Catholic Church had snuck out of Africa because he was involved with the African National Congress, and so he was on the side of the oppressed, the black oppressed, and they knew that he was either going to be put in jail, and Nelson Mandela was in jail then, and he knew him, and either that or he would be killed, and they thought probably killed. He was a young, vibrant, passionate man. And so he came to our community during this 10 days of world development and educated us about the point of view that he brought with him, which was not, as a young woman in my early 30s, it was not my point of view. I didn't understand it. I didn't know anything about it. I was ignorant. No excuse, but I was ignorant about it all. He was inspiring, dynamic. He used scripture to sort of back up what he was talking about. And I mean, he was talking about justice and human rights, and he was talking about we're all the same in our being, regardless of our politics, regardless of our ancestry, that we are spiritual beings, that we are the face of God in life. And honestly, it's not something I had really thought about. I grew up in a pure white neighborhood on the farm, no education in any of this. The other person I met was a young guy that was teaching at the university quite newly, and he was from Central America, and he was Guatemalan. And he was well educated, and he looked at root causes of what was happening in Central America from the perspective of the indigenous people, his people. He said something simple to me, saying to me that I simply have blinders on my eyes and cannot see because of the way I was raised and who I was raised with. And a simple little example I'll never forget. He said, when you look at a box of crayons, one of the colors in that box is the color flesh. Whose flesh is that? It's not mine, he said. Oh, who thought crayons could be racist? He said, if you're buying a Band-Aid, what color is the Band-Aid? Flesh. Whose flesh? It was an experience. It was an experience that lasted maybe 4 years, and it was transformative. It completely changed my worldview. And now when we travel throughout the world, I just see the world so much differently. And I know that you're further along than me because that past and this future are really quite different. That we have been, I think, much more sensitized and educated by our Indigenous truth and reconciliation, by Black Lives Matter, by the We movement of women, by the gender movement of all the different genders where we realize that gender is actually fluid, we're on a continuum. Color is actually fluid too, we are on a continuum, especially as our world starts to trade and live with each other. There's one life. That life is the divine. That divine life shows up as you and as me, in different colors, in different political persuasions, in different educational opportunities, in different ways of parenting and different ways we've been parented. There is no way we are going to have the same opinion as everyone else, maybe not as of anyone else. In my household, that's enriched me and driven me crazy that my husband and I have different opinions on quite a number of things. It was especially difficult when we were raising teenage sons. Because mothers, I think, do have a different idea of what they want their sons to do, what's acceptable behavior and what's not. But, we've been married a long time, and my last chapter in my life, I want to be able to say that I have loved deeply, that I have lived fully, that the Spirit of the Divine has had its expression through me as joy, as unconditional love for this world and everyone and everything in it. I know that this center and coming here has been a transformative force in my life. Norm and I were talking about it in bed this morning, where our routine in the morning is we go downstairs and bring up the coffee and we sort of serve each other. And if the weather isn't raining like it was this morning, we sit outside and we watch the birds and we have our coffee together. I don't think I would have stopped to actually figure myself out to the same extent I have without coming to this center. Without understanding that the divine is not away and separate from its creation. That there's not a pecking order of who's valued most. Whether you're the doctor or the householder, we are all one. And so as you leave this morning, I would like to invite you to just maybe think about writing a little list of who you are. What are your qualities? What's your attitude? How do you treat people? And what's your unique beauty? That's what Kelly O'Connor did. And it changed her life. There's a power for good in you. I feel it when we're together. When things aren't going well for me, I can always find support here with you. Namaste.